I'm Dr. Gregory C. Hutchings, Jr., Superintendent of Alexandria City Public Schools.
And I'm Michael Shea. I'm an economist and I have a background in education data analysis. Join us in conversation. So in reference to closing the achievement gap, which is something that in Arlington and across Virginia is a big issue for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. This is obviously something that I think you've been concerned with your whole career, but did you have I don't want to call it an aha moment, but is there a moment you can think of where it really sort of personalized the issue for you?
In regards to equity?
In terms of equity.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the moment I arrived into the world, to be honest with you, my entire life, I mean, equity has always been at the forefront, for me as an African American in America. And I think I became most aware of it probably when I was 5 years old in kindergarten, actually here in Alexandria City Public Schools, where my kindergarten teacher told me that, the sky's the limit and you can be the first black president of the United States, right? When I began to realize that, there were going to be some barriers throughout my life, because she was trying to prepare me to be tough and to go out and advocate and be an activist, for myself. So I think that is when equity was really introduced to me in different terms, not the term equity, but in regards to, the impact it can have on you.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because speaking as a white person, you don't get that speech because you don't need it. You have white privilege.
That's right.
So, all right, I want to start with data, which in some ways is not the most important issue, I think, with closing the achievement gap, but it's the issue everyone seems to start with. What role do you see data playing? How important is it that the community see data? Yes. How have you used data to help close?
Yeah. So, I think data really should be used to help you kind of monitor your progress, to make sure that whatever action steps or whatever initiatives you're working on, that you're actually seeing some progress, with the kids. And data is typically the source to be able to do that. It can't necessarily be on what you feel, like I feel like things are better, right? Or you ask people, do you feel like things are better? Yeah. I mean, it depends on what day you're asking, right? But I think data gives you some concrete information on whether you're seeing the progress that you are striving to make within an organization. So I think data is good, but I also need to make the point that, data is not everything, right? And it's also having the right kind of data. And I'm very adamant on, looking at state data, because I think that's important data, and that's how the state kind of determines how school divisions are doing across their state. But I think that we need to use multiple data points, whether it's attendance data, discipline data, internal data that you may have, climate surveys, to determine kind of how your staff, how your families, how your students are feeling on a day-to-day basis. I think all of those data sources are just as important as any type of state data that many school divisions use.
I agree. So across the country and in the Commonwealth, No Child Left Behind, 2002, sort of a data explosion.
I just started teaching in 2000.
Well, that is interesting. Data explosion, and so there's an awareness in many ways for a lot of people now, for the first time, of an achievement gap. Do you, coming to Alexandria, coming to your other places where you've worked, did you need to get a greater awareness in the community?
Well,
How important was to get the data out for that?
I think that, and I'm glad you brought up No Child Left Behind, right? I think No Child Left Behind really just brought up data to our legislators, right?
Right.
Educators have always known there's been an achievement gap, right? If you talk to people for many generations, this was what the whole Brown versus Board of Education was about. Right. It was about inequities, and it was about, students of color, particularly African American students, not receiving a high quality education and not receiving the right resources to be successful. So I think that the achievement gap has always been around for many, many years. I think the legislators began to want to define what that is, and that's how they came up with things like No Child Left Behind and looking at state data points and state assessments. But the achievement gap has been around for many years. It's just been called different things.
Right. Yeah. Fair point. So let's start with early childhood education and its role in closing the achievement gap and its importance, because first of all, it's very important for students to have that be ready for kindergarten.
That's right.
So how does that fit into a strategy of, in your experience,
Yeah.
fitting in closing the achievement gap?
So I think it goes even further than early childhood education. I think it begins the moment the baby is growing in the womb of the mom, right? That is when it starts. The prenatal care,
Right.
Being able to talk to your child and read to your child before they even enter the world is where we need to begin to work with our obstetricians and gynecologists to make
Right.
sure that they're talking to future moms about the importance of not only taking care of your body, but making sure that the child who's growing inside of you is receiving a high quality experience, right?
Right.
And then I think it gets into, how do you talk to your children once they enter the world? What do you expose them to, whether it's music, whether it's sound and letters and smiling face or, laughter? All of those things have a significant impact on the future of our young people. And then we get into the early childhood education stage, where every child really deserves an early childhood educational experience. And I think that unfortunately in America, that's not the case, that everyone doesn't get it. And what that leads to is, the moment the first day of school in kindergarten happens, we have an achievement gap, because we
Right.
have students who have had opportunities that others have not.
Right.
And instantly they've had this exposure. But there is hope that, even if a child doesn't receive those early learning experiences, that we can still narrow that achievement gap beginning in kindergarten with additional supports, making sure that we have the right class sizes, making sure that we have the right teachers who are leading these classes and facilitating the instruction in these classes. I think that early learning is very important, but it goes even beyond that, and it begins in the womb.
So I want to get back to something related to that in a second, but just quickly, to what extent is it really at its root an opportunity gap and not an achievement gap, do you think? Or would we be better off just referring to this as closing the opportunity gap?
I think that, the opportunity gap is what leads to the achievement gap, honestly. I think that, have you heard of the expression opportunity hoarding? And opportunity hoarding is when you have a certain privilege and you have these opportunities and you believe that only your child deserves them and nobody else does, right? And we see that in a lot of populations, particularly in our affluent populations. Now it's not even so much about race, it's about class. And, opportunity hoarding is real. And I think that the less opportunities and exposure young people receive at a very early age will lead to achievement gap issues, not just in kindergarten, but for the rest of their lives. And I think that is why, we have to take things even further than, just what the academics and what kids learn inside of the classroom. It is also the experiences that they have outside of the classroom. And that's why I'm an advocate for, kids having field trips and kids going to farms and kids being outside and having international travel before they graduate from high school. All of those experiences I think are important for all kids, regardless of, who their parents are, what their zip code is, and what experiences they've had throughout their lives.
I spent a day about a year ago at Asbury Park High School visiting with their early college program that they've created. And the phrase the principal and administrative program kept making reference to was, their goal was to take kids from low-income families and make their world feel small.
That's right.
So that they'd be motivated to pursue education and get out of it as a way to get out. And it's opening up those opportunities that they otherwise don't have.
That's right. I think the more exposure you get, regardless of what age you're at, it piques interest. And when that interest is piqued, you can get the kid hooked. Once a teacher, always a teacher, right? So I was an elementary teacher initially, and I was a middle school teacher. My goal was always to hook kids on a particular topic. And once I see their eyes brighten up and they're laughing and having a good time, then now I know I can teach them. Now I know they're ready to learn. And I think that you can only do that through experiences. It can't just be about, book knowledge and about standing in front of the room and, having kids regurgitate information. It's about having kids have learning experiences that are hands-on, learning opportunities, that are experiential learning opportunities, that are going out and taking advantage of things that are in your city or especially in this area, in DC, and then also around the world. And technology has made it even easier for us, because now you don't have to get on a plane to go to another country. You can go onto Google and Google that country and see pictures, and you can see, Facebook Live and somebody actually in that country at this time, participating in something in another world, right? Or in another country. So I think that we can now bring so many things to our kids that there is no excuse that, that there's opportunity gaps, for our young people with so much that we have access to. That's at our fingertips, that are on our phones, right?
Right.
So, I think that the sky's the limit at this point. We just have to now start being a little more innovative in how we teach and how our kids learn.
Right. Related to the issue of engaging the community, school systems will sometimes try to attack the achievement gap by focusing on discussions within the school about the role that racism plays in the community. Mm-hmm. And it's often not part of a broader conversation with the community as a whole. Do you think it's important for those sort of conversations and those sort of community gatherings to focus on the broader picture in the community?
Absolutely. I think that in order for any school or school division to even obtain success, it takes an entire community. Mm-hmm. And I think that, and this is something that I tell people all the time, especially when we're talking about race issues, right, or equity. No one has the right to be comfortable, right? No one has the right to be comfortable. And it is very uncomfortable to have discussions around race. It makes people experience discomfort, and discomfort is always good because guess what? It makes you grow as a person. Right. And it takes you out of your comfort zone so that you're able to kind of see the world differently or see someone's position or their perspective a little differently. And we have to make sure we're engaging our community around those uncomfortable topics, and we have to be courageous enough to have those conversations. And that's something that I know, here in Alexandria we're ready for. I know we are a community where we embrace the diversity, right? We say
Right.
it and by words.
Right.
Now it's time for us to discuss what are some of the inequities and what are some of the unintentional as well as intentional biases that we all bring to the table, and how do we check ourselves, right? How do we check those biases so that we're not allowing the biases to make certain behaviors manifest, on a day-to-day basis, especially in education. And that is going to take a community discussion. Educators can't do it alone. Right. And if we have an isolated discussion like that, it is not going to have or make the progress that, we're seeking in regards to narrowing an achievement gap or an opportunity gap or being a world that's accepting of all people.
And related to that, part of what, even going back to you talking about the doctors and obstetricians about prenatal care, coming up with parents in the preschool years, coming up with teachers in the school years, a lot of what's involved is not just like changing a policy or changing a budget, but changing a mindset among people.
That's right.
How do you do that? How do you do that effectively? Do you have any?
I think that's one of the hardest things, yeah. Right? That's the hardest things about this work because, when you're trying to change somebody's perspective, right. Or change, something that someone has just believed for so many years. I mean, you look at society and how there's so many kind of like mixed messages about, what's right and what's wrong, right? And who's right and who's wrong and who's better and who's not and who looks good and who doesn't, right? That you're constantly fighting these life experiences that have really made you think a certain way for so many years. So I think it's one of the toughest things that, one of the hardest nuts to crack, right? But right. I think that we can do that by being courageous enough to keep pushing it, mm-hmm. and, not backing off of the discussion and accepting the fact, as I said before, that you just don't have a right to be comfortable. Right. And, and I think that when we talk about privilege just in general, who wants to give up their privilege, right? That's a hard thing to do. So we can talk about white privilege, we can talk about class privilege. I mean, there's so many different privileges that are out there, right? We can talk about power privilege, right? Depending on what position you're in your particular career. And, but who wants to give that up, right? But we have to be willing to say, let me set my privilege aside and let me sit at this table and have a discussion and let's do something about it, right? And this comes from within. I can't force somebody to think a certain way. I can't make somebody do something they don't want to do, right? But what I can do is I can push people to try to, think outside the box and to be a little more open-minded. That expression when they say you can take a horse to the water, but you can't make them drink. Right. And actually, you can make the horse drink if you give them salt. Right? Because it's going to make the horse thirsty and the horse will drink the water. Right. We have to find some other ways to get people a little more engaged and a little more open to kind of looking at things differently, or we're going to continue to have the same results that we've always had in this country and across the world.
Right. Related to that, I wanted to ask you about cultural competency and cultural awareness in teachers and staff. Because a lot of times the issue related to achievement gap is phrased as needing to find teachers and staff and counselors, people of color, so that students see in themselves the people that are leading them. And that's very important, and it's important to focus on recruiting and retention. But at the same time, I think it's also important to focus on what are the ways in which the teacher who's not a person of color is falling short in the way they connect. And are they doing that through some implicit bias? Are they doing that for whatever reason? Is that something you can change through professional development? How do you change that?
Yes, I mean, I think cultural competency, which you said, cultural competency is really the way to go. You know, I think that it is important for kids to see people like them, right? So I do believe that can have a positive impact on a young person's life, to see someone, you know, and I don't take it lightly being an African American as a superintendent, right? Because I have a presence in this community, and I know that whether I want to be or not, I am a role model, or I'm giving somebody hope, right? But I also want to be able to give people who don't look like me hope as well. Right. And I want to be able to have the cultural competence that I'm able to meet people where they are, not necessarily where I want them to be, and to not make judgments based on what they look like or what they've done, right? So I, from within, work on that on a daily basis, because in this position, I deal with people, right? That's my life. That's my job. That's what I do. So I think that the cultural competency piece is a very important component to seeing students or teachers or, you know, staff being able to meet the needs of all kids, you know, regardless of what color they are, and what race they are. So I think cultural competency is key. But I also think that even, you know, I'm going to extend it even further from having educators or people in, you know, positions who look like them, you know, students see people who look like them, that they also need to see resources that look like them. We need to have books where, you know, the lead character is a person of color, or has a disability, or speaks another language. That we need to make sure that, you know, posters and things that we see in our schools are also reflections of all different types, you know, of people. And I think that those are other ways that we can help kids, you know, feel that they are not less than, and it can contribute to them feeling like they deserve to be at the table. And that's, you know, that's the one thing that I know my wife and I do with our kids. We want them, we're raising 2 African American children, right? 1 boy, 1 girl. And we want them to always know they deserve to be at any table. It is not an exception for you to be at a table. And you should never think that there's something special about you because you have achieved. Because the expectation is that if you put forth the effort, if you have people who support you, if you get access to the right things, that you can do anything you want to do. And if you know how to read and write, anything is possible, right? You know, so, I mean, of course, you got to have an interest and a passion too. But if you know how to read and write, you know, you can do pretty much anything in this world. Right.
I wanted to ask you about one thing going on in Ohio, your previous post.
Okay.
Because in my research of Shaker Heights City, they have something that I don't think is typical in a lot of school divisions, which is they have an upper elementary school. So that it's a district-wide school for 5th and 6th grade. And the reason I find that interesting is some of the conversation that school systems will have about achievement gaps is trying to compare resources at one school or another. And the value of a district-wide upper elementary is it's one school for everybody.
That's right.
But it's also important to me because I'm speaking now as a parent and my own son's experience in 6th grade. 6th grade to me is a really critical year.
It is.
Because it's where you make that move from reading to research. It's where you get that foundation, where you make the move from quantitative skills to analytical skills. The problem is, in some ways, it's also your first year in middle school, which feels a lot different than elementary school.
That's true.
And if it's a crowded school, it's going to feel very stressful for a good part of the first part of the school year. So do you think there's a lot of value in making that a focus, having sixth grade still be in upper elementary, and let students focus on that foundation they need?
You know, I think that, so when I got to Shaker Heights in 2013, I was surprised to even see a 5th and 6th grade upper elementary school, because I had never worked in an environment that had one. But what I learned from that is that there are multiple models that can work,
okay,
you know, for kids. I really think there isn't a grade configuration that's best. I think that you can make things work by having environments where kids are being nurtured, are being cared for, and in some cases they may have to be isolated from others, right, until they are developmentally ready or it's developmentally appropriate for them to have exposure to, you know, some of those upper grades. And you can do that in a number of ways. When I was a middle school principal in Nashville, right, so the structure there was 5th through 8th grade, right, so 5th through 8th grade was in the middle school,
right.
And we structured it so 5th and 6th was, we kind of separated 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th, right? And that's similar to what an upper elementary in Shaker Heights was like.
Sure.
But we were still under one roof and in one building. We just had our teachers collaborating and working together, and we had the kids kind of working in different wings of the building to, you know, kind of separate them from the other grades. And that worked for us as well. You know, I think here in Alexandria, we have a middle school that's 6th through 8th grade. And we make sure that our 6th graders, they're in an environment where they're new to middle school. We're trying to nurture them, get them acclimated to the middle school kind of climate and environment. And that's working, you know, for our kids here. But when I went to school here, 6th grade was in elementary, right? So, and I felt like I got a good education too. So I think it's hard to say that there's one, the point I'm making is it's hard to say there's one particular grade configuration that's going to give us the biggest bang for our buck, right? I think that if we give the nurture, the care, quality teachers, you know, high quality learning environment, kids are going to thrive wherever they are. And I always go back to saying, and this is not that I want to go back in time, right? But we have people who went off to become like Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, right? Who taught themselves how to read, and who went to schools in like a one-room schoolhouse and changed the world. So if you have good educators who are going to be there and who are going to give you an environment where you're exposed and you're growing and you're learning, and you have also kind of that kind of desire to want more, anything is possible regardless of what environment you're in, which I think is pretty amazing about being, you know, not just an American but a part of the world.
Having students feel valued. My father was a teacher, then he became administrator, and then a principal. And he used to say his first job, start of the school year, was learn every new student's name. That was like, he saw that as a principal, was the most important thing. And it's important for teachers to develop relationships with the family, to understand the family.
It's very true.
And one of the things that I've heard when I've talked to superintendents in Virginia who have very low, notably low suspension rates, which in Virginia we have a serious problem about racial disparities in our suspension rates. So what they point to, first of all, their policy decision that it's not good to suspend, we're going to find alternatives. And secondly, though, they feel like their teachers do a good job of building that relationship with the family. And they feel lucky because these are often very small school districts.
That's right.
So typically, without even making it part of planning, a teacher is going to get the siblings. So the oldest will come through in 3rd grade and they'll get to know the family, and then by the time the other siblings come through, they get to know the family. Is it worth, in scheduling, trying to build, with a large school district like Alexandria or Arlington, that's not going to happen by itself. Is it worth trying to schedule siblings through the same teachers?
Well,
to build that relationship?
You know, I think it depends, because, you know, sometimes you don't have a good kind of chemistry with a certain teacher, and you don't want your next child to have that teacher.
That's true.
And then also our kids are different. You know, I just think of my 2 kids, you know, in general. Micah, she's 13, Gregory, he's 8. And they're very different people. That the teachers that work for Micah may not work for Gregory, right? And vice versa. So, you know, I don't know if that is a practice that I say that, you know, could solve our issues, but I do believe that building relationships with young people, you know, I think that if you're going to be an educator, and any capacity, right? You have to be a relationship builder or you're not going to be effective, period. Right. If you don't have relationships with our students, if they don't believe that you actually believe in them, right? And if you as an educator, if you don't have the efficacy to believe that you can actually teach these young people, it's never going to work. You're not going to get the results ever that you're seeking. And I think that, that relationship piece is probably one of the most important components of having a high quality learning environment for our kids. Even when you look at the data of students who have disciplinary issues and challenges in schools, the key factor is that they're disconnected, right? And whether it's in the classroom or it's in the school environment, a relationship can prevent some of those behaviors from manifesting in the classroom. And that's one thing I learned even as a teacher. Keep kids busy, right? I needed to have discussion happening in our my class when I taught science, right? So it was easy for me because, we did a lot of hands-on activities and there was a lot of collaboration, but that kept kids engaged. So I never had disciplinary problems. I'm not going to say kids didn't act out, right? But we always found ways, I always found a way to kind of take that energy and make it more positive in my classroom and set some expectations and some guidelines and build those relationships. So when a child is acting out, we had a relationship that I could sit down and say what you were doing wrong and what you need to do differently. Right. And they actually were receptive to what I had to say. Without that relationship, I would just be, yelling in their ear, right? And they wouldn't listen to me. So I'm going on a tangent, but I think relationships is very important.
In that situation, they're more open, the student is more open to telling you what it is that is on their mind.
Yes, but you also have to have, and speaking of kids telling you what's on their minds, we talk about restorative practices, right? Which in Alexandria we truly embrace, and we're looking to make sure that this is, a practice that's done at all of our schools, implemented with fidelity at all of our schools. And one component of restorative practices is community circles, where you're talking with your students and the teacher, right? And you're talking on different topics that don't relate to the education or the content you're teaching, in your class. Just talking about life or your day, your morning, your afternoon, what you're doing this weekend, right? What's on your mind. And I think that is a way to connect with young people, because our young people, they're bringing some challenges, to the table. We're seeing in regards to social and emotional needs of kids on the rise, right? And it's not because we have, bad parents, right? It's because we have kids are having exposure to traumatic experiences, even if they're in a home that's wholesome, with no violence and no arguing and no abandonment, right? Kids are seeing the violence on television. They're seeing the violence in some of these video games that they're playing, and that exposure is triggering some of the same traumatic issues that they would have if they were in an abusive home, right? So we're seeing this social and emotional kind of these issues that kids are bringing to the table on the rise, and we're going to have to start building these relationships to help work through that in our schools and in our buildings.
How important is it to have peer tutors, have peer mentors, and have develop that sort of group that a student's going to feel comfortable in and engage in academically? Is that an important piece of it?
I think it is important. I think there are multiple ways, right? Okay. Because some students, they actually thrive working by themselves.
That's true.
And they thrive without having, extra people around them and chaos and, confusion. So I think that we have to find opportunities where kids get all those different types of experiences. Right. We really want well-rounded students who can, thrive in an environment with people, who can thrive in an environment by themselves, who know how to collaborate, who know how to public speak, who know how to have some analytical skills and to be able to analyze material, to come up with their own conclusions around things. And, I think that we really have to find a way to just meet kids where they are and to also consider the person that they are, right? I think that one thing that I've learned, from my wife in particular, because we're like night and day, right? I'm more of the extrovert, she's more of an introvert, and what she's taught me, we've been married almost 17 years, is that, because I would always say, you gotta, extroverts, they can go talk to anybody, they can do this, and she was like, but introverts can also, they can read a room without saying a word. and they can
Right.
see things that you
Right.
don't see, right? So introverts have qualities as well, right?
Sure,
And
sure.
that's the point that she made to me. Like, you don't have to be an extrovert to be successful, right? That you can be an introvert and still attain the same success. We have to go into our classrooms with the mentality that let's meet kids where they are. Let's determine like let's try to find out what type of person they are so
Right.
that we can provide them what they need. And what they need is different than the child that's sitting next to them, and it's different than the kids that we're going to have next year. And I think if we can get into a philosophy of not having kind of this cookie cutter approach for
Right.
everything, and thinking that we're going to have this one answer that's going to solve all of our issues and our problems, if we can get out of that, we will see the achievement gaps, we will see opportunity gaps, we will see this world not be as judgmental as it has been, since the beginning of time.
Right.
We'll see so many changes in regards to who thrives, because now we're not judging you off of the person that you are, or making inferences that you have to be a certain way to obtain success or to have a high performing educational experience.
If you think we can solve the achievement gap, not just in Alexandria but across Virginia, what is it that gives you hope?
Our kids.
Yeah.
I think kids, as long as we have kids on this earth, right, I will always have hope. And I believe as long as we have educators who believe in kids, and that's something that I think is very important. For me, I look for people to have three things. I call it VIP. It's not very important people, right? It's vision, it's integrity, it's passion. If you have those three qualities, and you're in an educational environment that's thriving, that has the resources that they need, kids can do anything, right? And I think that, I find my time to get into school buildings so I can actually see our kids, to remind myself why I do this work, because the people, the adults in this work give me the gray hairs for the most part, right? It's not the kids. So, we have to remind ourselves as educators that, we're in this business to change the future. And the only way to change the future is by making sure our kids achieve and have a quality education.